These are the words of Trish Doyle MP. The federal government's new airport will have a huge impact on our lives. The revelations so far are that there will be no curfew, there will be a concentration of flight path merge points above the lower Blue Mountains, and there will be no rail infrastructure links to alleviate the road congestion exacerbated by the new airport. The Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, must do a better job than he has so far in explaining to our community what the impacts of his airport will be on our area. One information session is not enough. Moreover, Mr Turnbull must take on board the concerns and criticisms raised through the public consultation process, and he must act on them. We need to have those who are making these plans and decisions turn up and answer questions at a range of public meetings. Our community must mobilise to ask these questions and demand straight answers. Over the past 2 years, I've explained that an airport only had my conditional support if the Abbott-Turnbull government would release a new and independent environmental impact statement, provide the public with information about curfews, flight paths and noise impacts, guarantee rail infrastructure and permanent employment opportunities for people in the Blue Mountains and Western Sydney, and provide protection for our World Heritage listed national park area and surrounds, preferably with a tick of approval from UNESCO. On the question of 24/7 flight paths, in my opinion, I don't think there should be one rule for the city and one rule for the West. If Mascot is to retain its curfew, then the Turnbull government's new airport should also have a curfew. The EIS analysis says very little of any substance about the potential impact on the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area of aircraft overflight above our national parks. Substantial sections of the World Heritage Area and Sydney's drinking water catchment will be beneath the new flight paths. So the EIS must address what needs to be done to protect these areas, instead of pretending that because the proposed flight paths are indicative only, it can't thoroughly analyse those impacts. We should not have to wait until the airport is up and running to start looking at the environmental impacts. These concerns need to be investigated and addressed now. I would encourage concerned members of our community to contact our federal MP Louise Marcus and make her aware of your views. We must let Mrs Marcus know what we think of the plan to build an airport on our doorstep. As a proud member of the Blue Mountains Conservation Society, I would encourage people to also make use of the information provided on their website and Facebook page and get involved in this campaign. Our next step is important. Work together as a community in the fight for changes to some of these ludicrous proposals. Let the voices of the Blue Mountains be heard. So says the member for Blue Mountains, Trish Doyle. Thank you. Now, normally I accept 6 speakers on an item, 3 for and 3 against. Tonight I have 11 for the Council's proposition and 3 against. It is my intention to admit all speakers tonight so that everybody gets to have a say, and I think that is really important. So if everyone will bear with me, we will indeed have all speakers. I think it's important, before I take speakers, just to very quickly go through the resolution that you're all speaking to, and that is before the Council tonight, because I know for a lot of you this has come quickly and you may not have had a chance to properly digest it. So if I can take a moment, I'll walk you through the resolution that is before the Council tonight. The first part of the resolution is that Council notes its previous position and resolutions on the proposal for a second airport at Badgerys Creek. That the Council asserts its opposition to the significant impacts identified in the draft EIS arising from the proposed Western Sydney Airport flight paths on the Blue Mountains local government area and Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. that the Council notes that the draft EIS identifies that the Western Sydney Airport flight paths will have detrimental impact on the Blue Mountains community's aspirations for a livable city with a high quality natural environment. In particular, extensive flight path activity concentrated over the lower mountains, over lower Blue Mountains towns and villages and the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area, inadequate consideration and measures to address the negative impact on tourism, recreational and ecological values of the lower Blue Mountains, significant increase in noise impact, estimated at 55 decibels across towns and villages as well as natural areas, and continuous and increasing levels of aircraft movement through a 24-hour cycle, including at night, over the lower Blue Mountains, resulting in approximately 200 flights a day by 2030. That the Council writes to the Commonwealth Government to express its concerns with the inadequate timeframe for public exhibition and community engagement and seeks an extension to the public exhibition period to allow a minimum of 90 days for formal consultation. That the Council endorses the preparation of a submission to the draft EIS and that this submission be reported to the Council at the ordinary meeting of 8 December 2015. That the Council delegates the authority to the Mayor and General Manager, that's dangerous, to undertake appropriate action in support of Council's position on the impacts identified in the draft EIS, including authorising the expenditure of up to $50,000, the authority to engage with other affected local councils and the ability to call a public meeting. That the Council are kept regularly updated on issues as they arise during the public exhibition period and are consulted on the proposed actions during the preparation of Council's submission and actions proposed as part of any public initiatives. That the Council writes to seek an urgent meeting of the Mayor, Deputy Mayor with the Honourable Warren Truss MP, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development, and separately with the Honourable Greg Hunt MP, Minister for the Environment, to discuss the location, concentration and significant disproportional impact of the proposed flight paths in the City of Blue Mountains. That the Council writes to seek an urgent meeting with the Federal Member for Macquarie, Mrs Louise Marcus MP, to reiterate Council's concerns regarding the impacts on the Blue Mountains of the airport proposal and to seek her views and support. That the Council extends invitations to participate in any subsequent meetings on this matter to representatives of our strategic alliance partner, Penrith City Council, as well as the adjoining Federal Member of Parliament, Ms Fiona Scott, MP, Member for Lindsay, given the proposed concentration and noise impact of flight paths on both the Blue Mountains and Penrith. And that the Council writes to the Commonwealth Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development to express its concerns with the inadequate timeframe for public exhibition and community engagement and requests that a letterbox drop with information about the proposed airport and draft EIS be completed to all Blue Mountains residents and that a further community information session be held in November. That's what's before us. I will now turn to public speakers. I have 11 in favour and 3 against.
I think we're all very fortunate that this council has sought specialist advice on such an elaborate EIS. It's really quite difficult to find out precisely what it's telling us, and I make no claims to understand the detail. But I have got a couple of real concerns. One is that the EIS is considering stage 1 only, the single runway, and we're promised that around about 2030, I believe, there'll be a second runway. We don't know anything about that, and presumably if the first runway gets built, it would be very, very difficult to be objecting to the second one. I think that's a fairly big issue. And of course, I'm also concerned about the relentlessness of the no curfew, which is already in your motion. But the specific fear that has led me to come and speak tonight is that as we're seeking to find a relief from the proposed flight paths, if the Council's first position can't be achieved, I fear an abominable choice may be offered. Do we relieve the decibels over the residential urban areas.
Sorry, move extension of time by a further 2 minutes. Move Councillor Fell. Seconded Councillor Bennett. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Joan, I think you've
Really
earned that.
sorry,
No.
everybody. No, that's
Joan,
a bad
Joan,
beginning.
I won't do it often tonight, but you've earned it. 2 minutes, please, Storm.
Anyhow, the abominable choice between the urban living areas or the protected native areas that are surrounding us, the natural areas. So it's almost like, would you prefer to destroy the quality of life of your father or of your mother? That's the sort of issue that I'm particularly concerned about. So in this discussion, I hope we can remember the amazing values of the broad environment in which we live. Only 15 years ago this month, the Greater Blue Mountains, all the 10,000 square kilometres were inscribed on the World Heritage List. And there's a question, why? And it's because of the story they tell us of Australia's evolving eucalypt vegetation and sheltering habitats over country with breathtaking views, tablelands, cliff faces, valleys, waterfalls, swamps teeming with life, and great tracts of wilderness for the human experience of solitude as much as anything else. And of course, with our much-loved string of towns threaded through. So the antiquity and that fragile diversity of forms of life and the beauty are what are at risk here. They're vital to our cultural and economic life. And this is a place which has great strength, but also enormous vulnerability. In 2000, Australia promised the world to protect the outstanding quality of this area forever. That's what the World Heritage Convention says. And so that was a formal commitment, a formal international commitment to share the custodianship of the place with those who already cherish it, like this council, national parks rangers, firefighters, climbers, everywhere, Indigenous and non-Indigenous residents and visitors. So I think it would be useful that the council remind the federal government that it is obliged to ensure that no environment harm comes here. Thank you.
My name is Jeff Mile. I'm a resident in Lithgow and I'm here as an interested citizen. I oppose recommendations 2, 3 and 5. I put to the Blue Mountain City Council that time and resources expended on engaging with opposing the development proposal for the Western Sydney Airport could be better spent elsewhere. Evidence I see suggests that the Western Sydney Airport, if it proceeds, will probably be redundant before it even becomes operational. Therefore, council members will not need to be concerned about any environmental impacts within the Blue Mountain City Council LGA related to the proposed development, as it is probable there will be no aircraft landing or taking off from this proposed airport. The bad news for stakeholders includes potentially several $1 billion of capital investment squandered on a white elephant that could be better utilised and spent elsewhere, and the consequences of a post-peak oil world that our society is apparently ill prepared for. In 2009, Dr. Fatir Birol, as then chief economist at the International Energy Agency, said, quote, "One day we will run out of oil. It is not today or tomorrow, but one day we will run out of oil and we have to leave oil before oil leaves us. And we have to prepare ourselves for that day," end quote. To me, this is sound advice, but it seems that many of our political and business leaders continue to willfully ignore it. In December 2013, the world's oldest ongoing peer-reviewed scientific journal issued a special theme publication concerning the future of oil supply, where the authors of the introduction paper stated, quote, "We conclude that a sustained decline in global conventional production appears probable before 2030, and there is a significant risk of this beginning before 2020. The inclusion of tight oil resources appears unlikely to significantly affect this conclusion," end quote. Other energy analysts are also warning of impending and inevitable structural changes to our energy supply systems beginning in a timeframe of the order of years, perhaps months, but not decades away. Yet many politicians and business leaders behave as if our fossil fuel supplies will remain affordable and abundant indefinitely. I recommend you look at my submission, number 36, to the Australian Senate inquiry into Australia's transport energy resilience and sustainability, and my April 9 public hearing testimony recorded in Hansard on the Australian Parliament website to gain an overview of the looming energy security challenges. My presentation slides and script to the New South Wales Planning Assessment Commission public hearing concerning the Airlie Mine Extension Project review can be found at the PAC website. Christopher Webber at Katoomba explained succinctly on page 18 in the October 21st edition of the Blue Mountains Gazette why the proposed airport is likely to become a, quote, a white elephant sooner than you think, end quote. Instead of expending time and resources on engaging with opposing the proposal for the Western Sydney Airport at Badgerys Creek, in my informed opinion, Blue Mountain City Council should be considering how it will continue to perform and function in a post-peak oil regime.
Thank you.
Yes, my name's Donna Mulhern. I'm from Woodford and I support the recommendations and urge an addition regarding current excessive airport noise in the Blue Mountains, that the excessive noise that we currently experience be investigated and action be taken to ease residents of that excessive noise that we are now experiencing. I moved to Woodford 2 years ago from the city to get away from noise. I moved with plans on my 9-acre beautiful bush property, which was a significant investment, to do meditation. We built a labyrinth. We invite people who are traumatised to come for healing in the peace and quiet of the Blue Mountains. You can imagine how we feel. Let me give you an indication about what the Western Sydney Airport, how it's going to impact, because I've got a little bit of experience to share. I can shed light on those noise levels, which currently are just figures. In the morning, I'm woken up at 6:20 a.m. every morning through my double-glazed windows with thick curtains drawn. From a deep sleep, I'm woken up. At night, I'm a sensible girl. I go to bed around 10:30. I'm woken up then at around 11:30 by the last planes going through again. And all day, every 10 minutes, they go on and on and on. I tested today on that little trendy little flight tracker app. I thought, okay, they're talking about 10,000 feet, 5,000 feet. That must be what's going on here at Woodford, because it's so very loud. I'm going to check what it is. So I went on. It's a very funky little thing. You look at the map and the airplane comes across, you click on it, and it tells you, listen to what wakes me up at 6:20 and 11:20 p.m. 17,250 feet wakes me up from a deep sleep. Folks, we are in trouble, and we are in deep trouble. I heard 19,000 and 20,000 as well. This is not, they call it traffic noise. This is not traffic noise. This is noise pollution. We moved here to get away from traffic noise. Some of us suffer from the highway traffic noise. We don't want more traffic noise, and those of us who don't have it don't want it, and that's why we moved here. Ecotourism is the future of the Blue Mountains. Ecotourism will suffer the most. Western Sydney Airport will not bring tourism to the Blue Mountains, it will repel it. I'll give you my anecdotal evidence. I'm a bit of a cheeky girl. I approach tourists who are having their cafe and have to raise their voice when the planes come over at Wentworth Falls. I say, what do you think about this? They said, well, we decided last night we're not coming back here. We'll try the Central Coast or the Southern Highlands. I heard one person booked out of their B&B a day earlier. They said, we're going home to get some peace and quiet.
I grew up at West Pymble, underneath the North Shore flight path. We had converging flight paths at 5,000 feet. Noise there was sufficient that when the planes started to come over at 10 to 6 in the morning, when the curfew stopped, you couldn't hear the radio. When your alarm went off, you heard plane not talk. We moved to St Peters at the time when they were looking at building a third runway. We did extensive study of the EIS, and we thought we were quite well informed and made a decision based on that we would move there. Effectively, the EIS had predicted moderate noise on the periphery of the flight path. This is the government official document. Ended up with planes overhead about 1 day in 3 landing. So no confidence in the veracity of the EISs. Now, as far as the airport itself goes, I suspect that's well and truly a done deal. The ship has sailed as far as that not going ahead. Flight paths, there are 3 considerations that will be taken into account. Safe ops, minimising the affected number of residents and maximising the movements. Guess where the minimum number of residents are? I don't have much luck in having a big impact on the actual flight path plans. Curfew, hopefully we can do something. Curfew and night noise. I worked at the Gore Bay shipping terminal for Shell for many years. That's a site that was responsible for bringing in 40% of the state's fuel, so it's not a small thing. When the ship engine noise exceeded 50 decibels, we were forced to shut down. This is for a few hundred residents around the lower North Shore on the harbour. I went out and personally was taking readings, was my job. The ambient background noise is about 43 decibels. So 50 decibels was a grand total of 7 above the nighttime background noise. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on what will happen here. The documentation that's been supplied to us by the government contains a wonderful selection of words: might, may, projected, predicted, planned, potential.
My name is Tony Adamski, and I live where that green dot is and where the convergence of all the arrivals to come to the airport there, I live there. So I'm only, the flights are only 20 k's away from me, and they're all coming into Blaxland right there. So that's where I live and that's where I'm coming from. What I'd like to do is to absolutely congratulate the Blue Mountain City Council, the Mayor, the General Manager, officers and staff, and all the councillors for this excellent addendum that's included a few other additional points of meeting with the Deputy Prime Minister and Louise Marcus and Fiona Scott. For council to come in and go into bat for the whole community is absolutely tremendous, because without the support of yourself, Mr. Mayor, the General Manager and the officers, we here as the community would find it rather heavy going to try and combat what's proposed down at Badgerys Creek. So thank you very much. Thank you all the councillors. Thanks for the great effort that's been put into this document here. I absolutely love the consultation that is proposed in terms of meeting with Mr. Truss. He needs to be met with pretty quickly, and some of the other people that need to be talked to. I would encourage also that the Prime Minister somehow get into the scheme of things, because he needs to be told what's happening around here. And I would encourage everyone that's here to write not only to the local member for Macquarie, but also write to the Prime Minister and just let him know what's going on and what our feelings are, and just how this EIS is going to adversely impact on the lower mountains. Now, there was a speaker there earlier on that spoke about at Woodford, I think. She came from Woodford, and there's the flight tracker. Now, there is a flight going from Kingsford Smith, flying over Glenbrook at 5:10 p.m. on the 30th of October, flying at 11,600 feet. Now, all of this stuff that's in the EIS, and there's 50,000 pages or whatever it is, it's very difficult to negotiate, but there are diagrams in there. That all comes from the EIS, and I do encourage everyone to make a submission to the EIS, write to Louise Marcus, write to the Prime Minister, write to everybody, and become engaged with the council in terms of how they're moving forward with the public forum community engagement, because this can be stopped.
Thank you, Tony.
And thank you very much.
As can you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Tony. Well done.
Susan Templeman, Hazelbrook, but my heart's in Winmalee. I'm speaking in support of the motion. As a Blue Mountains resident, I know the threat that bushfire poses to our community, but I see the plans for arriving aircraft at Western Sydney Airport as the biggest single threat to what makes this place unique. The EIS puts a bullseye directly above Blaxland, Glenbrook and Warramoo, sending planes through our skies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, something that no other part of Sydney is subjected to. There's no curfew, no noise sharing. These flight paths are simply unacceptable. I spoke to many people prior to the EIS being released. Some accepted that some planes would fly overhead, others didn't. But no one anticipated that 100% of arrivals would fly at the volume and the height. You've heard the figures for Blaxland, but people haven't yet looked at other suburbs like Winmalee, where 20 to 30 flights a day at 6,000 to 7,000 feet and 15 to 30 in the evenings and overnight to start with, increasing over time to 145 over a 25 period by 2050. To city dwellers who always knew that KSA was in their basin, it may seem like not a big deal. But the very reason they come to visit the mountains are the same reason we chose to live here, peace and quiet. That will go. We don't live here because we like bushfires, and we certainly don't live here because we like getting up at 5 a.m. to commute to the city for a day's work. But we deal with those things because we absolutely love this place. And the idea that we will never be able to sit on a summer evening on our verandas not accompanied by aircraft noise rumbling from above absolutely devastates me. The ABS data recently showed that once people move to the mountains, we don't leave. You actually have to carry us out in a box. So you can expect our community to fight to preserve as much as we can. I'm angered by what's in this EIS, by the lack of time this community's been given to digest it. It shows a total lack of respect by the federal government for us. And we're being given just 1 3-hour opportunity to attend an information session was an absolute disgrace. At the very least, we deserve equity. If it's good enough for those who live on the North Shore and the East to have a curfew and noise sharing, at the very least, that's good enough for us. If that makes sense. This is one of those issues that I get really emotional about, any attack on our way of life. Now, this needs to be above party politics. Whether you love the idea of an airport on your doorstep, whether you accept it as something that's inevitable, whether you loathe the idea of planes flying relentlessly through our skies, this is the time to come together and fight against this EIS. The Council can lead by example on that score by voting unanimously in favour of this motion.
My name is Bob Treasurer. I've lived at Warramoo since 1973. In that time, in the name of progress, I've seen many developments. Some good, some not so good, some bad, but this is the greatest abomination I've ever come across in my whole time in the mountains. I'm here to say that you people are going to be charged with being NIMBYs, not in my backyard. It's a way of insulting you for trying to protect your way of life. But I'm here to say I am a Niobe, not in anybody's backyard. I'm here to say that we can oppose this airport and we can win. We are in exactly the same position as they were in 1998 when the EIS was distributed and circulated. People responded to that. There were 15,950 responses to that submission. 99% of them were against. Can we emulate that? Yes. Can we spread this whole word, not only to the mountains but to the people of Western Sydney as well? Can we do that? Yes. We can stop this airport, and I'll tell you why we can stop it, because it's not even necessary. It is unnecessary. It is one of the great con jobs of the last decade. It was thought up by a failed Prime Minister who needed to say something about infrastructure. It is a con job. Let me illustrate why. Most of you know that Sydney Mascot already, even with the curfew, only operates at 60% capacity. That's the truth. You may not know, or you may know also, that since the Howard government canned it back in 1999, it's only increased its usage by 3%. Why? Because more people are packed into bigger planes. That process is going to go on into the future as well. You may not know that the management of Sydney Airport has been quoted as saying, and I will quote, that they can handle the doubling of passengers to 74.3 million by 2033. That's not me that's saying that. It's Sydney Airport Corporation. Trust me, they don't want this airport, really. They've been dragged to the table on it, and they know why. It's not going to be profitable. The only way it can be profitable is if it has a curfew. That is the only way. We need to remember that. Could I just say this? Oh my God. Can I just say this? The main argument in the need for Western Sydney Airport has been international tourism. I want you to see this bar graph of passenger movements in the last year at Mascot. Do you think this is Dubai or Singapore or anything like that? Does anybody make a guess? Which one is this, Kuala Lumpur? No. The one on the left, 8 million movements, is to Melbourne. The next one is to Brisbane. Then the next one is Gold Coast, Adelaide, Perth. It's only when we get to Auckland that we get to a foreign client. The other ones, the ones that I mentioned are down here, Dubai, Singapore, etc. 60% of the passenger movements moving out of Mascot are domestic, ladies and gentlemen. Domestic ones, not international ones. This whole thing about the pressure of international tourism is a load of codswallop. Badgerys Creek is going to be predominantly a domestic airport. And I'm here to say, please, can you give me an extension? Just a few minutes, sir.
No, as afraid as I am to say it, Bob, I think your passion speaks a million words, and that was a corker. Thank you very much.
Shay Fernanda, and I'm definitely for the what's been proposed. And how can I follow your act now, really? 3 minutes is not enough to say how I feel violated about this, and I'm sure every one of you in this room also feels violated about what has occurred. What's been put upon us only 1 week ago has not given us enough time to really get out there publicly, nationally, to say what an absolute disgrace this is upon the people of the Blue Mountains. I'm not of any political affiliation. I'm a resident of Blaxland. And as I said, we feel violated. Everyone in the mountains feels violated. We're coming together as a community, not for a political party, not for any other sort of affiliation group. We are here to fight as a community. When we come together to help the fireys, whenever it's a bushfire, what gets us through? What gets us all through? It's the spirit of the Blue Mountains. And we need to call upon everyone within the Blue Mountains to come ahead and fight together for this. I am absolutely disgusted at the proposal and the detrimental effect this is going to have on the community, but on all levels. The repercussions are for, not just environmental, but for tourism, for ecological reasons, for personal reasons. I just think that what's been happened to us, and excuse me for saying this word, but I feel like it's been a rape of the people of the Blue Mountains. It's taken away choices from us. It's been inflicted upon us without our knowledge, without our consultation, and that's what violation is. Violation is a form of rape, and that's what's happened here. We have been the sacrificial lambs out west for far too long. We need to get together and fight. I have emailed World Heritage Organisation, and I got a reply from the director, and I said about the urgency for them to get involved with this as well. I have also emailed many other conservation groups, wildlife organisations, National Parks and Wildlife, and what they told me is that everyone needs to get onto their Facebook pages to send them an email as well, because it's the voice of the people, the voice of the Blue Mountains that is going to get us through this. No other public out there will, not those affected. People don't want it in their backyard, not at all. So I'm imploring everyone here tonight, use any form of media, social media, talk to friends about it, and get people to use these websites. I've also given Mark a list of all the different type of conservation groups, wildlife groups, national park groups. Maybe, Mark, that you can also post that group on the forum. So those people are thinking, who do I contact? You've got a reference point to go and look at. So please, and I know you're all here to fight together, we can do this. We did it for the bushfires every year when we have catastrophes. We can do it for this as well. Thank you.
Shay.
Shay and I live on the same street. We live in Blaxland, and we overlook the national park. It's beautiful, it's spiritual, it's revitalising, and it's surreal. And I feel I live in the most beautiful spot in the world. Last week, out of the blue, it was brought to our attention what the proposed flight paths would be. I was totally and utterly dismayed at the proposal. I went to the one and only information session in Blaxland on Saturday, and I was in total shock at what was proposed. In fact, I had to be nearly carried out. I was crying, I was in tears, I was absolutely in shock. I phoned my husband and I told him, get here now and see what they're proposing. I was also disgusted that only one session in the Blue Mountains is scheduled. And I can tell you, Shay and I have been walking around Glenbrook, have been walking around our community, and nobody knows about it. No one. And I think that is shocking. There has been absolutely no inference in the last 20 years from the government, federal and state, that flight paths would come across the lower Blue Mountains. My husband and I are professionals, and we work extremely long hours, and we travel 2 to 4 hours a day. We don't mind making these sacrifices, Monday to Friday, because when we come home, we have a beautiful home and an environment to come back to each day, and know that we are revitalised by our surroundings at the weekend for the long week ahead. I and the community around me feel totally violated when the proposed plans were released. We never saw this coming. It's been an appalling shock. I have been in tears every day since the proposed plans have been announced, because I love the Blue Mountains. I love it. I love the Blue Mountains. In all my years of life, I have never witnessed such a violation upon a beautiful community such as ours. What can we do to change this? What can we do to stop it? Governments should not be allowed to violate and destroy a community in such a shocking, deceitful manner. I am absolutely distraught, and so are many others in my community. Please, please conserve the Blue Mountains. Please help. Thank you.
My name's Floyd. Floyd Chambers. I'm a resident of Falconbridge. I've heard a lot of emotion in the room tonight on against the airport. When I first came here tonight, I was asked to tick the box for and against. So my position here tonight is to, as from my personal experience, I was a pilot myself. I worked in air traffic control. I worked for Qantas for 10 years. My background was instrument approach procedure design. I'm coming out here to speak on one issue, and that is the wedge pattern that's actually been originated to that northwest sector could be positioned in another spot, basically. I think the airport's inevitable. I think it will happen. But it's a way we've got to work around it, okay? There's a more feasible area down to the southwest and south of Sydney, around the Thirlmere and Picton area. Okay, there are a couple of issues there. The 24 hours is another concern of mine. You've got the environmental issue that's coming over the mountains, and I think the areas down to the south are not as going to be less impactive. Okay, there's also the safety issue. There's less population down towards that direction. Currently, the modelling right now is 100% movements in that northwest sector. Okay. Basically, what that means is that orientation of runway 0523, it doesn't matter. We're going to cop the whole lot in that sector. Areas like Penrith and Blacktown will cop 50%, depending on the direction of the wind. Okay. There are places in the world where there are numerous airports in close proximity to one another. For example, in Europe, London Gatwick, London Heathrow, Stansted, Heathrow, Stansted and Gatwick. I believe that the current proposal should be reinvestigated further, because either way we're going to have to work with it and live with it. There are several options that can be done from a procedural design point of view, and they should be investigated by the powers above local government, not local government, on a federal level. Thank you.
That's a pleasure.
That's a pleasure. There's a question for you from Councillor van der Clay. Floyd?
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Floyd. Your comment was that the area around Blackstone, where I forgot what the word is, the merger point is there, that it can be moved out. My question to you is, as an expert who's been flying planes, can it be put over the sea on either the south or
The issue,
the other side of Mascot and the other side to the north of Newcastle, or to say Gosford and around that area out to sea?
yeah, the issue you have with those patterns that you just suggested is Sydney Airport. Okay, Sydney will still be usable, and it's the entry and exit points to that airport where you'll have confliction. Currently, what we have in the setup in the proposal right now, the departure routes are not the worst routes. The departure routes is where you have maximum engine noise coming off that aircraft. And the arrival routes are more of a quieter segment coming in. Not to say that they're not noisy, but they are of concern. The more proper area to put those entry points would be down in that just south of Camden, Picton, the Oaks as an entry point to come into that to the northerly runway, and then an actual fly around pattern back to the southerly runway.
Thank you,
Areas
Floyd.
like Blacktown, areas like Penrith will still get affected,
Thank you,
but on a
Floyd.
50% basis.
Thank you for that answer. Councillor, is that enough? Yep. Floyd, thank you for your time.
I won't go over much of the information that's already been put forward by previous speakers, particularly Susan Templeman. I could have had the same speech. I have a fairly simple point to make about this draft EIS. And just think of the words, ladies and gentlemen. This is a draft environmental impact statement. And the flight paths proposed in this EIS do not consider aircraft noise. And call me old-fashioned, but I would have thought that aircraft noise is an environmental impact. So therefore, how can we have in front of us a sufficient environmental impact statement to be taken forward for proper consideration? I can bore you and lead you through page 25 of section 2, where it says, it is important to note that the conceptual design did not consider potential noise abatement opportunities, which will form an essential part of the formal airspace design process. Consultation with airlines and other stakeholders would be undertaken. Weasel words. This document, this is the draft airspace architecture and operation. There is an airport plan that goes with this. It has been written by a bunch of propeller heads. It has the regulatory context, potential airspace parameters, airspace, control areas, restricted areas, defence airspace operations, danger areas, and then it gets to preliminary assessment of airspace. It says, an important aspect to note that relevant to this draft EIS is that a proof of concept design does not take into account other influences on air traffic movement, such as consideration of noise impacts. Call me old-fashioned, but I say the document is insufficient. And I would request that the Council make a strong representation such that this does not move beyond draft until a full assessment of those noise impacts has been made. That assessment has been made, including noise abatement. It is a fundamental failure in this document, in my opinion. Thank you.
Not my intention tonight to speak about my personal views for or against the airport. My focus is on addressing our concerns as volunteer firefighters in the lower mountains of the impact of the proposed flight paths in the exclusion zone that covers the lower Blue Mountains, which is part of the most bushfire-prone place on the planet. The exclusion zone, what does that mean? Will there be any effect or restrictions on air support for firefighting operations, on air support for hazard reductions, on our training that's critical to people being able to do their jobs, in establishing air bases? Can we establish air bases under those flight paths and in those exclusion zones? The flight paths in the lower Blue Mountains, they'll be as low as 5,000 feet. When you talk about the distance between the actual ground, and it's actually 4,000 feet, because the 5,000 feet is at sea level. With those flight paths being that low, are firefighting aircraft going to be able to work unrestricted below that height of 5,000 feet? And again, we're talking about fires, hazard reduction, all of those kinds of things. And in relation to hazard reductions without aircraft support, will the smoke, the particles, both visible and not visible to the eye, would they affect the aircraft? Will we be able to conduct hazard reduction programs under those flight paths and in those exclusion zones? We already have a very narrow window of opportunity to conduct hazard reduction. If we're not able to continue to do that with additional imposition, we're just not going to be able to get it done as effectively as we need to for the community. Thank you very much for your time.
During fire incidents, I believe the incident controller is airborne in a helicopter so that he can have vision over the whole of the fire ground. Is that right?
That's certainly true in some circumstances, where time allows, and depending upon the circumstances, certainly the incident controller does do that. It is not uncommon for divisional commanders, the field-based commanders, responsible to be up in the aircraft, in some cases almost on a daily basis. We sometimes deal with an enormous amount of aircraft. I think available to the RFS across New South Wales, we have something in the vicinity of 300 aircraft. And when you're talking about multiple aircraft, you're not just talking about the ones that are dropping the water, you're also talking about those aircraft that are up there doing the coordination as well. And by virtue of that, they need to be at a higher level again to the aircraft that are doing the water bombing and fire suppressing.
And Greg, how many days a year would you estimate that we usually get for hazard reductions?
Oh, that is
well, further to that, and how often are they cancelled because of air pollution or an issue like that?
Oh, both very good questions to which I can't give you a very good answer. It really does vary from year to year. There have certainly been hazard reductions that have had to be put off because of air quality issues. There's certainly no doubt about that, and the Department of Health takes those things quite seriously, of course. But you know, with the weather that we've had this year, for example, we've had, I would think, no more than 4 or 5 days where we've been able to do hazard reduction as part of the RFS program, and obviously the national parks have been able to achieve some this year too, but certainly it's been a lean year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Corrigan.
I want to thank the council as well, because I've been going through hell for such a long time with flights going overhead, so I can imagine what it's going to be like when they bring this in, or if they do. But we can stop it. I rang the pollution people at Mascot and asked them why Warramoo was suddenly a flight path, and they said because another area in the mountains had got together sensibly and got a whole lot of people's signatures, and they were able to change the flight path. So we can, I don't know how true that is, but that's what I was told. And I won't mention the place that it was, but I just think they're very sensible people. The thing that got me most was I had to ring the fire brigade. I saw this enormous ball going down across from my house, and I thought, my God, a plane's going down. It wasn't a plane, it was pollution. And I got the fire brigade, and in the end they told me what it was. I rang the police and the fire brigade. Not very long after that, and I don't know if this is an effect or not, there was a bushfire in that very area between two schools, Blaxland Public and Warramoo Public. So I have no idea whether that was a cause of it or not, but, you know, that was very dangerous because there were so many children that were involved that couldn't get out because they couldn't get the buses in to get them out. We had one night I came home from, I just nearly cried because in the air there were 5 planes, and I know they were practicing for this airport. There were 5, some going east, some going west, and they were flying right over our house. So I beg everybody to get together and fight this. We can do it. We can stop it.
Since the day I was elected in 1999, I have opposed any airport at Badgerys Creek. As President of Wesrock, I led that fight along with a lot of other people in the community. Trish and Kieran Murnane are here in the audience. They were in the Sun Herald with me the day the Howard government shelved the issue, and I'm sure they're feeling the same sense of deja vu that I am hearing now. Wesrock's changed its position on this, but we have not. And while it is the case that some of us in the room, like me, might be opponents of an airport, others of us in the room would countenance an airport, but what unites us is this proposal. What's before us now is this proposal. And what needs to be fought is this proposal, because what was before us 15 years ago was not as bad, nowhere near as bad as this proposal. Because what we have right now is, quite frankly, simply summed up with one word: it's unfair. It's unfair because all of the convergence points are right here in the Blue Mountains, above Blaxland, Warramoo, down to the bottom. It's unfair because there is no noise sharing. It's unfair because it's 24/7. It's unfair because no one else cops this level of noise, just us. It's unfair because it happens 365 days a year at 5,000 feet in some points. That is, quite frankly, unfair. And there's no doubt at all, when you look at that and compare it to how the inner city is being treated, it is no doubt that we are being treated as second-class citizens. When John Kanihar spoke before about his experience at St Peter's, or at least there was some respite, there's none for us. None for us at all. And this council, with you, will fight this proposal. We will fight it. Because who wasn't shocked when it was released just a week ago? Whose breath wasn't taken away? As a long-term activist against any airport, I couldn't believe what was proposed. Never in my wildest dreams did I think it would impact the Blue Mountains this much. And we will not let this go. And we will not leave you unattended. Because whatever threatens the Blue Mountains, as was said before by Shay, I think it was, be it bushfires, be it developers, be it aeroplanes, this council will not leave this city unattended. Whether it is getting the state government to do the right thing after 2013, whether it's asking them to accept our LEP, or whether it's telling any politician of whatever political flavour that this proposal is unacceptable, this council will not leave you unattended. There's a simple philosophy here. It's not very ideological. And it's this: if it's bad for the Blue Mountains, this mob will oppose it with vigour until we get a result. When I mean this mob, I don't mean us around the circular chair here, I mean you too. Because we are nothing without you. As I say, when I was Wesrock president 15 years ago, I was extremely young, we were told we'd never stop it. We were told we had no chance at all. And we stopped it. Yes. Didn't we, Bob? Yes. And Bob would agree with me when I say that we can stop it now. We need to be as belligerent now as we were then. And we need to stick together. That's when we're best. Whether it's fires or LEPs, that's when we're best. When we stick together. That's what the Blue Mountains does really well. We need to stick together as we do at all times. There are people from all walks of life in this room tonight. Fireys, people who do all sorts of jobs, sitting in this room tonight. We all vote different ways, with different religious views or none. We're all different. But there's one really unique thing about us. When the Blue Mountains is threatened, haven't you noticed how we stick together? And we need to do it now. I'm not going to kid you and say this isn't going to be a very big fight. And I can't promise you victory, but I can promise you this. If we don't try, it will happen. Thank you.
Many people reside in the mountains as is relatively quiet and peaceful. Aircraft noise from planes approaching this proposed airport will have a detrimental and a severe effect on this peace and quiet. This airport will not have a curfew, which means planes will land 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and take off as well. Also, if a plane that is intended to land at Sydney's Mascot Airport cannot make the curfew there, guess where it's going to be diverted to? We do have planes flying over the mountains at the moment. You do hear them, they are noisy, especially in the 6 o'clock in the morning, sometimes wakes you up. However, if planes are flying into Badgerys Creek or Western Sydney Airport, they're going to be flying at a lot lower altitude because Badgerys Creek is a lot closer than Mascot. And there'll be a lot more of them, and they'll only be about 1.3 kilometres high. I can't work in feet, I've got totally out of that imperial measurements. Okay, there has been an argument that planes are getting quieter these days. That may be the case. I'm not an expert on aircraft noise, so I can't really qualify that or comment on that. Okay, older planes such as 707s, 727s, DC-10s, 9s, earlier versions of Airbuses and 747s have been phased out. And the noisy turboprops, I won't mention the manufacturer of this plane in case I utter a swear word, just think of the family and meet the parents. The manufacturer had a plane called the Friendship F-27. It was a turboprop. It was a very noisy plane. That's now been retired. They were real screamers, you could really hear them. Okay, however, also many older planes when retired from passenger service are converted to air freight use. So a lot of these noisy planes, once they're no longer used for passengers, they're used for freight. Okay, the UIS states that planes won't have to dump fuel. Dumping fuel is not common these days. However, if an aircraft has to dump fuel, so they have to be a certain weight to land, if they're too heavy they can't land. So if an aircraft has to dump fuel, where's it going to dump the fuel? At the moment, if coming to Mascot, they usually dump it in the sea. Where are they going to dump fuel if they're landing at Badgerys Creek? Okay, there have been certain arguments put forward for an airport, such as job creation. The claim of thousands of jobs may be wildly optimistic. The claim about increased tourism doesn't really stack up. The majority of tourists will still want to go to the city. They can easily come up by the mountains by train anyway, which a lot of them do, or a lot of them drive up. Convenience also stated as another positive. However, driving to this proposed airport will only be will actually be 25 minutes shorter than going to Mascot at present. It would take 25 minutes extra to go to Mascot than Badgerys Creek. Some roads from around this proposed area will be upgraded. However, in the case of Elizabeth Drive and the Northern Road, these roads should have been upgraded without the need for an airport. And the trouble is, with an airport without a rail access, the road's going to be congested. The lack of rail access is definitely not convenient. Mascot will be much quicker by public transport. On the topic of rail, if some investments made in interstate rail was made, there'd be less demand for an airport. By investment, I mean improving the existing infrastructure, so it doesn't take 10 hours to get to Melbourne, 14 hours to get to Brisbane, 4.5 hours to get to Canberra by rail. And at present, if you go to Brisbane by road, you get dumped at 4 in the morning, which isn't hardly convenient. Okay, there has been pushed for a very fast train, but I think in the short term they should upgrade the existing infrastructure. And I've got 19 seconds. Okay, in conclusion, if these flight paths cannot be altered without impacting on other airports in the Sydney Basin, then perhaps this site is not really suitable for an airport.
This is just an isolated proposal. This does not come as part of an overarching plan for the whole of Western Sydney. This just comes as, let's look at an airport, we're going to build one. And then there's a lot of stuff flows from that in terms of infrastructure that Councillor von Schulenberg's referred to. I would like to see a total plan prepared that convinces me that there's a need for an airport in the first place. Because my belief is that air travel, it's not our major transportation need. The major problem that we have in Sydney is not getting to the place from somewhere else. It's getting around the place once you're here. So it's the travel within the basin, not to it, that's the issue to be addressed. That's our major infrastructure need at this time. And that problem that we have in getting around is only going to be exacerbated by an isolated development of an airport
with half thought out transport links leading to and from it. That's my general opposition to it, and I maintain that. We have before us, as you've pointed out, a particular proposal, and I have further objections to that particular proposal. I have objections to a plan which brings all incoming flights, up to 200 a day being projected, over the inhabited part of the mountains. Of all the places in New South Wales to fly the jets, they're going to go down the Great Western Highway. These planes, when they go over here, where I live, in Springwood, in Beef Farm Road, by the way, these planes are going to be closer to my house if they go at 5,000 feet above sea level than the railway line is. And I'm not far from the railway line. If I want to catch a train, I walk there. It's not a big distance. Putting it another way, and in the sporting metaphor much loved by television commentators, it's only 22 Olympic swimming pools long. That's the elevation, and it starts to get scary. I have a love of swimming. I have a love of AFL, and to put it in another framework, it's less than 10 AFL football fields long. That's the elevation that they will be at, and that scares me. Scares me quite deeply, not just for myself, but for everybody around me. Because the impact is an impact not in an already busy area, which I know that has a heavy enough impact. I have friends in places like Leichhardt and Marrickville. Can't afford to live there, but I can visit. They let me. And sitting in their lounge rooms, I hear airport noise against the background of busy streets and trains and whatever else. I still hear those planes coming over. And in an area like where we are, in the lower mountains, I'm going to hear that enormously. It's the classic situation where in a busy environment, you won't hear someone drop a hammer into a tin bucket or something like that in a busy factory. But if they do that outside my bedroom window at about 3 in the morning, I'll hear it. And my reaction will be one of some degree of shock, as it will be if I get a plane going over my place, and more so if I get 200 of them going over my place, in which case I will probably think that all of them are actually a Fokker, the brand that was referred to by Councillor von Schulenberg.
Just for the members of the audience, he said Fokker, okay? It was not anything else, okay? There was no other word said.
And none was intended. I'm not good at identifying aircraft. So 24 hours a day over the mountains, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, but not around Kingsford Smith Airport, the equity argument that you referred to. It's just not on, it's just not fair. And this is an issue that we've dealt with, it's been dealt with several times in the past. It's been put on back burners, it's been around for decades. Now all of a sudden we have an EIS that has to be commented on within 60 days. I mean, we give 30 days for an extension on a house, for comments on a development applications. We gave 5 weeks for people to give feedback on whether or not we had green bins. These are important issues, but somehow I keep thinking of the 200 aeroplanes that are going to go pretty close to being over my house, and I think 12 weeks just might not be enough time.
But firstly, I'd like to thank the speakers tonight and the people coming out tonight on such a miserable night to come up here on such a very important issue. Like yourself, I was opposed to this when I ran for council in 1999. And I had then long conversations with my friend and yours, Mr. Kerry Bartlett, who was the federal member from Macquarie, and I believe he's offered to give us a helping hand in with this to facilitate meetings and so forth. And we won the battle then. But this is going to be a little bit hard because over the last year or so I've been going to, every time this airport came up, the council has had a briefing from the department and none of the runways were discussed when they briefed the councillors, the proposed flight paths. They came to speak to council and council officers only about community consultation. And it was only after I put up a matter of urgency that we got a consultation in Springwood, because I'd gone onto their webpage and found that all the consultation that they were going to do was on the plains. There was none to be done in the Blue Mountains until we kicked up a bit of a stink, and then they came along and spoke to us. But reading through their documents, and I find that these people who prepared the EIS and the Department of Planning, they just can't get things right. For a prime example, and if you read through the documents, Air Services in New South Wales, or Air Services Australia, I should say, I keep on making that mistake, relating to flight paths, are supposed to, I repeat, are supposed to, when they develop these concepts for flight paths, are supposed to consult with government, that's state and federal of course, and councils and residents. It's written in their documents. Have they spoken to Blue Mountain City Council or the residents of the Blue Mountains? No. So there we go. Councillor Miles and myself, a couple of weeks ago, we went to Parramatta on the invitation from the department to get a briefing on the EIS. And Councillor Miles and I walked out of that briefing no word the wiser. I wasn't anyway. And some of the issues that the Rural Fire Service, Mr Corrigan, raised here tonight, I raised at that meeting. And I spoke to, and I asked the question, and Councillor Miles then asked the question again, because I don't think they really got what I was asking. Because I'd had a conversation with David Jones, the Rural Fire Service Manager, about what happens in the Hawkesbury when there's a fire, and they have all sorts of troubles of trying to get helicopters in when they've got a fire down the bottom there because of the RAF base. I asked that question, how will those flight paths affect the Blue Mountains? They couldn't answer the question. They had no idea. You have to ask the Air Services. And we couldn't even get a response out of Air Services, you know. But anyway, the only good thing is that when the staff read through the EIS, Air Services Australia are supposed to consult, because they say this is a draft. I got my doubts. But they're supposed to consult with the residents and the council. But, you know, this might take more than 10 years before they start doing that. You know, so look, I've got a whole lot of concerns with this, and I will do everything in my power to stop this airport, or at least try to change the flight paths, because I believe that those flight paths can be put somewhere else, not over our area. The residents of the Blue Mountains moved here because this is a residential area. The Blue Mountains is residential. It shouldn't be something for flight paths, because one of the things that in all the briefings that we had, and even at West Rock, Councillor Fell was with me, then we were talking about the runways and the flight paths, and they were talking about flight paths going over the development areas of, I can't remember that. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
And the rural areas of Camden.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am not as eloquent as most of the speakers were tonight. I will try not to repeat the things that you have all covered, which I think are all the major issues. I just wanted to say that from my perspective, when I had a read through that EIS, I was extremely disappointed. I'd been hoping for something that would actually answer the questions, be sensible, cover all the ground it needed to cover. It did no such thing. No such thing at all. People have raised all the RFS and hazard reduction issues. It's a huge thing. Where is it? Nowhere. People have raised the curfew. Any discussion about that? Not really? No. But the biggest one, from my point of view, the biggest thing that concerned me about it was the complete silence about the effect of all of a sudden having 200 planes a day, you know, or building up to 200 planes a day over your house. There is like nothing. There is nothing about that. And I just think it's unconscionable of them to have produced a document that does not deal with one of our absolutely critical, vital concerns, is the effect that those planes will have on our way of life, our homes, our families, our communities, what we do every day, where we live every day, where we have chosen to live and why we have chosen that. There's a fair amount of talk about the World Heritage Area. I'm not sure that I trust anything they say there either about plants, water, air, fauna, blah, blah, blah. But certainly there is nothing there to guide us as to their even recognition that 200 planes a day might make a bit of a difference to how you live in your home and everything about your daily life. The only other thing is what Councillor Fell said that really annoyed me was that 60-day period. That's beyond ludicrous. So that's all I want to say. Thank you all very much, and we will fight for you, for us, for everybody else in the mountains. Thank you.
If you really listen, you might hear crickets or my wife snoring. Because that's the sound from my house in Winmalee, my front yard, my backyard, every night, every day of the year. That is the sound of silence. Now I'm being told by the boffins that hastily cobbled together this ticker box EIS that 55 decibels, that 60 decibels and the occasional 70 decibel intrusion into what you've just heard is of minimal and acceptable impact. So the experts suggest that 55 decibels is a conversation. A bit of a vague description for mine. Is it a pub conversation at midnight? Come what may, I don't want any conversational equivalent disrupting my sleep every night, every 5 minutes. At 60 decibels, we have a busy office. At 70 decibels, a passenger car. Hour after hour, increasing, always increasing, forever increasing, to ultimately we read 85 flights an hour by 2063. Read it and weep, folks. You are worthless. Your lifestyles mean nothing to the people who drew those lines on those maps. Mr. Mayor, I came to this council fighting for what was a very important lifestyle issue in Springwood at the time. Compared to the threat to our chosen way of life that has just hit the table, that issue is an atom on a giant's fingernail. This cuts to the fabric of who we are and why we choose to call the Blue Mountains home. This issue is about our heart and soul. Let's be very clear. We live in a World Heritage listed wilderness area that is globally unique. We live in the bush, which is both spectacular and peaceful. And now all that is threatened. Let's not beat around the bush. This is all about politics, colleagues. This airport was a captain's pick by our former PM that should go the way of dames and knights. However, if you are to accept that this airport is going to be built, we as a community must galvanise our collective wills into having these destructive flight paths changed. The decision to send them over Blaxland, Glenbrook, Warramoo, Mount Riv, Yellow Rock, Springwood, Valley Heights and Winmalee is a political decision. Undoubtedly, our lack of urban density put a target on our towns. One can only conclude that the seat of Macquarie is seen as expendable. I put to you that a decision was made to concentrate all the pain on one area with a relatively small population. Let us be absolutely clear on this. This will be a white-hot election issue next year. The absence of equity is further galling, Mr. Mayor. We in the West have always known that our leaders have not seen us as being equal to those living in the East. Of course there will be no curfew for our airport. After all, the planes are quieter these days and us bogans are deep sleepers. It is an insult to every resident of the Blue Mountains and Greater Western Sydney who will be forced to endure flight noise. Sound effects letting me down. Around the clock when our well-heeled inner city colleagues, here we go, continue to be protected by a curfew. This is unacceptable and cannot stand. The lack of noise sharing for this airport is further evidence of the politics behind the decision. Ladies and gentlemen, the draft EIS concluded that, among other things, There is no significant impacts are expected to the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area's geodiversity, biodiversity, water catchment or recreation and tourism values. I say nonsense to this, and whoever wrote it clearly does not enjoy bushwalking, camping, canyoning, mountain bike riding, trail running, rock climbing, or even the act of sitting on a ledge in quiet reflection for their recreation. Ecotourism and busy flight paths are uneasy bedfellows, and this will have economic impacts. Put simply, the whole point of these activities is to escape the world we have built, not to look up and see the 307 Qantas quite from Jakarta is running 5 minutes late, and look, it's dumping fuel because in theory it will vaporise in the air before it hits us as long as the temperature's right. Goodbye Euroka clearing, I loved thee much. Farewell Martin's Lookout and Grosehead South, Falconbridge Point and Sassafras Gully, Blue Gum Swamp and Birdwood Gully, and all of the secret waterholes and hidden gems of my chosen home. Nah, stuff that, Mr Mayor. These places are all worth fighting for. Let's rise up against this madness and fight like we are on death row, for our quality of life faces the gallows if we fail.
This EIS is an intellectually lazy, deceitful piece of garbage that has been cobbled together by some people who have betrayed those people who think the airport is a bad idea, those people who think the airport is a good idea, and those people who aren't sure and would like more information. It is an absolute disgrace, and whatever your view on this is, the best way to advance your goals, whatever they may be, is to shoot down this shabby document. And I'll enlighten some of the many ways that it is shabby, and I actually won't have time, even with the full 5 minutes that we have here tonight. So start with a little bit of history. In January 2013, I received an invitation to go to the same room in Parramatta that we went to a few weeks ago to hear about why we needed an airport at Badgerys Creek. This was a surprise. It had been off the agenda for a long time. And a number of people at the Western Sydney Business Chamber said this is how it has to be. Some people, in fact some pretty senior people from the Department of Infrastructure and Redevelopment were at that meeting, tagging along. Those same people were at every single meeting that I went to afterwards, and those people, that department, have been pushing this airport from that time to now. And guess what? They're the ones who have put the EIS out, and they're the ones who are going to judge the submissions. Now, we don't do that. We don't do that in this council, but imagine that we said to a developer, you take all the submissions, you determine whether they're right or wrong, and you let us know, and we'll just tick that off. And that is the expectation that the department has and that it is submitted to the federal government. Well, this is going to be a very political issue, and the Deputy Prime Minister needs to take leadership on this, because this EIS is utterly unacceptable, and we're going to explain for a very large number of reasons why. And I think process, even though it's about the planes, it's about the noise, but it's about the process that got us here. How did this happen? Who made these decisions? Well, what are those decisions? We could talk about, and I'll table these documents for inclusion in our submission, Mr Mayor, but what are the baseline particle readings that we have in Blaxland so we could understand what effect it might have of these planes flying over? There's nothing about that. There's 158 sensitive receptors, the EIS tells us. Here's a map of them. Not one of them is west of the Nepean River. So you won't know the effect that these aircraft flying overhead will have on your area. The second one, which I was quite disturbed about, is the issue of why are these flight paths like they are? Please explain, dear bureaucrat. Well, he said, it's because of the impact of Kingsford Smith, we don't want to cross paths. You wouldn't want these planes to bump into themselves, councillor, would you? No, of course I said no. Can I have a look at those flight paths, please, dear bureaucrat? No, we don't have them. Look on the Sydney Airport website. Well, I did, and they weren't there. I ended up going to Councillor Vanderklay's favourite group of people, Air Services Australia, and kind of found something. But as one pilot and then Councillor Shrub informed me, the flight paths are actually quite fluid. They can go in a number of different locations. So just going on what I know from personal observation and the fantastic apps that we have these days that tell you where every plane is, and please get one, Flight Tracker or Plane Finder 24. It seems that they head south out of Sydney and then they head for the beacon, which is just over here at Shell Corner, and then from wherever they may be, or they may go north out of Sydney and come up Parramatta Road and the Great Western Highway. But at what heights? Well, there's no information whatsoever about that. until you go to Air Services Australia's, and this is not the EIS, this is not information contained in the EIS, you've got to go to external sources to find information to inform your view of what the EIS is about. It turns out that the separation between aircraft must, if they're under 29,000 feet, must be how much? 5,000 feet between aircraft? 1,000 feet. It is 1,000 feet. 305 metres is the standard for aircraft to be away from each other so they don't bang into each other, Councillor. Now, I'm thinking that if they can get that high out of Mascot, they may not actually be going to impact on what happens there in Badgerys Creek. I think the department should have told us these things. I think they should have informed the public so that people could make an informed decision instead of having to go and research this stuff themselves. This is a disgrace. The people are expected to make full-on decisions about what is going to impact on their quality of life forevermore, and probably at all hours of the day, without having the correct amount of information. We don't know about pollution, but they didn't even know, in answer to Councillor Vanderklay's question, about the issue of bushfires. I'll leave it there, Mr Mayor, because there will be so much more.
I hold a commercial pilot's licence, so I'm not averse to a little aircraft noise per se, but not over our world-famous Blue Mountains, not a holocaust of never-ending aircraft noise, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We want birds, not Boeings over Blaxland.
Yeah.
We want fresh air, not Airbuses in the mountains. And not to labour the point too much, Mr Mayor, we want quietness, not Qantas, over our World Heritage listed area. Noise is usually defined as unwanted sound, and its perception can be characterised as a subjective reaction to a physical phenomenon. So noise, apart from being unwanted, is highly subjective, and there's an abundance of research worldwide on that subject in relation to noise under flight paths and around airports. And it's led to a number of descriptors that are used when assessing aircraft and airport noise. For instance, the day-night average level descriptor is based on an average hourly ambient noise level over a 24-hour period. However, and this is very interesting, a plus 10 decibel penalty is applied to nighttime, those hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. This nighttime penalty is based upon the assumption that people react to nighttime noise exposures as if they were subjectively twice as loud as daytime exposures. The same sound level with increased evening and nighttime sensitivity is perceived as being twice the volume as during the day. Now we've seen and heard the rhetoric coming out of the draft EIS. No need to worry, it's okay. As Councillor Lucchetti said, it's just conversational level. Well, I put it to you here tonight, and considering the plus 10 decibel penalty I've just mentioned, would it be acceptable to you to have random people engaged in conversation approach and pass your bedroom window at regular intervals throughout the night, every night? Noise perception, I would further suggest, is influenced by reasonable expectations of the Blue Mountains community in general. People who either grew up here or chose to move here have a reasonable expectation that the nighttime hours will be quieter than if they were living in the city. Most of us who choose to live in the Blue Mountains and commute to Sydney for work expect to be able to enjoy a level of tranquility at home, especially during the night time. It's called amenity, Mr Mayor, amenity. Amenity can be described as the pleasantness or attractiveness of a place. In fact, the draft EIS mentions the term amenity no less than 250 times. The draft EIS also concedes that long-term airport development would change the amenity of communities and recreational areas in proximity and under aircraft flight paths as a result of noise and visual impacts. However, in a separate section of the draft EIS, which ostensibly assesses the impacts on the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area, the apparent findings are that the proposed airport would not have a significant impact on the area. In particular, it notes the indirect impacts of long-term airport operation would, quote, not result in an attribute of the property being lost, degraded or damaged or notably altered, modified, obscured or diminished. Well, I don't know how this assessment defines attribute of the property, but if environmental and social amenity could be classed as attributes of a property, and I argue they can, then I call into question their assessment and claim categorically that any plan for 24/7 flight paths over the mountain will result in amenity notably altered, tick. Amenity damaged, tick. Amenity degraded, tick. Amenity lost, tick. This council and previous councils have worked hard and fought hard to ensure that certain provisions in our local environment plan or LEP are maintained. These provisions recognise and seek to protect the unique and sensitive natural environment and the distinctive character of our built environment and its interface with the surrounding national park. And we continue that fight presently. So why should we not fight equally hard as or more to protect the airspace above us from a proposal that would render any secured LEP provisions worthless? We may as well concrete from Laston to Lithgow. So I'm going to run out of time, I'm sorry. So no matter where in the mountains you currently live, we must all be galvanised and united in opposing 24/7 aircraft flight paths over our mountains.
I just want to say I'm absolutely impressed with the community, and that's why I'm very proud to represent it. I share these concerns and I endorse what's been said here tonight. But I'm rising to speak tonight about the impact of the flight paths on our precious wilderness in the Grose Valley, and I'm going to talk about it from a very personal perspective. And I want us to remember at all times that the Grose Valley is part of the World Heritage Area that we've heard of tonight. Now, some people like to say that things happen for a reason, and in this instance, maybe they do, because just 4 days before the EIS on the airport was released, my friends managed to wean me off my mobile phone and take a 2-day hike in the Grose Valley. It was rather stressful being able to turning my phone off. But what blows me away was that when I was walking there, I had no inkling, no thought ever entered my head that within less than 24 hours of being amongst the beauty, the majesty and uniqueness of the Grose Valley, that it would be under threat, that it would be potentially ripped apart by what I can only describe as a 5-fingered claw of planes coming in over the Grose Valley 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. During my walk, as Joan Domicile alluded, I saw many remarkable views: cliff faces, wildflowers, snakes including 2 death adders, kangaroos and a bright orange yabby. I paid witness to Australia's cultural heritage of our First Peoples as I thought about the tracks I was walking on and how long they'd really been there, along the edge of the Grose River. But what I remember most in the evening and going to sleep in my little tent in Little Blue Gum Forest and was my friends and I remarking on how quiet it was. No highway noise, no train noise, just a chorus of frogs, crickets and the boo-book of an owl in a place where we felt like time stood still. It never occurred to me on Monday the 19th, less than 36 hours after my return up a really steep ascent up to Lockley's pylon, that there would be a proposal before us to trash all of this. Having walked and slept in the Grose Valley and having looked at the flight paths, I question, and I quote, the draft EIS found that the construction and operation of the proposed airport would not result in the attributes of the World Heritage Area being lost, degraded, damaged or diminished. Whoever wrote this hasn't been to the Grose Valley. I am not convinced, as many others in this room tonight, I am not convinced by these bureaucratic weasel words. Having walked in the Grose Valley, I know that it will be impacted. And our council report highlights that the experience of tourists and the impact on wildlife and the solitude of this unique area will be affected. And people at the silly info session talked about, they've been with very proud puffy chests, about how Echo Point isn't going to be impacted by planes flying overhead. But the glossy brochures say nothing about Blackheath and Mount Victoria, let alone further down the mountains at Falconbridge Point, Lyndon, Winmalee and Woodford. While the EIS tries to allay our fears that you might not have to wait at Echo Point for a plane to move out of sight while you take your picture, there's no such guarantees at Govetts Leap, Lockley's Pylon or Falconbridge Point. Mr Mayor, I support this motion tonight because I cannot support the proposal for the flight paths for the second airport for Sydney. And if these are the only viable flight paths that enable 2 airports in the Sydney Basin, then I question the viability of a second airport located at Badgerys Creek. And I want to emphasise that in closing, that we are a city in a World Heritage Area, and that we in the Blue Mountains are not just custodians and advocates for a piece of bushland that sits at the bottom of our street. We are custodians and advocates for a stretch of wilderness that has a deep, rich, natural and cultural heritage, and that the world, via its listing with UNESCO, wants us to protect. So thank you.
Councillor.
As you're no doubt painfully aware, this continent that we live on is the most bushfire continent in the world. And the Blue Mountains are probably the most bushfire-prone land in this country. And yet this EIS does not address any of the concerns that Mr Corrigan has raised today. And I think it's just contemptible that they don't look at how this airport might impact and hamper the activities of this fine body of men and women who defend our land on a regular basis. It makes no mention how to manage the conflicting needs of commercial flights and airborne fire suppression activities, particularly around the eastern merge points of the local government sections of the exclusion zone. The draft acknowledges that much of the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area is currently impacted. Hang on, where am I? Yeah, is currently impacted by up to 10 flights per day at much higher altitudes than the proposed outbound flights. I can tell you, and we've heard testament today, that residents all along the eastern escarpment, the southern escarpment of the mountains, particularly in my case in the top end, have complained about the increase in flights up and down that path, and their flights that are inbound to Kingsford Smith Airport, and they're much higher than the outbound flights that will be coming up that pathway. Those flights will be much noisier because the planes are they're flying upwards, trying to escape the pull of the earth, and so they'll be much noisier because they are ascending, and they'll be operating day and night. Clearly, the operators believe that the fauna and flora of the world, like the fauna and flora of the World Heritage Area, the residents of the Blue Mountains will become habituated to any elevation in noise in the long term. Their quote. This is the way that the draft EIS describes the high wilderness quality of the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. The wild and rugged landscapes, diverse flora and fauna, and opportunities for solitude, self-reliant recreation and reflection are attributes that promote inspiration, serenity and rejuvenation of the human mind and spirit. Such experiences are highly valued by both individuals and our society. That's how they describe that thing. Tell me how that irreplaceable solitude and serenity is not going to be shattered, that a great national asset will be squandered, and that a world heritage, a rare world heritage, will be diminished by hundreds of aircraft thundering overhead day and night. We don't have to make that choice that Jane Domisel referred to between our mother and our father, between the urban and the natural environment. We don't have to make that choice. We have to stop this airport.
I'm rising tonight to briefly speak against the flight pass proposed in the draft EIS for Badgerys Creek Airport. Over the years, Mr Mayor, we have debated Badgerys Creek on 3 occasions, and the vote has always ended the same way, 11-1 against the airport, with myself being the one voice in favour, and that is still my view. However, that is not what tonight is about. Tonight, Mr Mayor, it's different. Tonight, we as a community can come together. The flight pass merging over Blaxland is the ultimate betrayal by the bureaucrats from the ivory tower of the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development. A lot of people have got into this process in good faith, myself included, only to have this good faith thrown in our faces. This is simply not good enough. My response to the flight pass is not a case of NIMBYism. Before last week, no one could have predicted that the flight pass would have been placed where they are. These indicative flight paths defy logic. Of all the routes, of all the locations, they chose to cover the Blue Mountains. They chose to put the merge point of 5 flight paths over Blaxland. In my opinion, these should be moved and the merge point should be shifted over uninhabited land. Over the past 3 years, I've consistently said that we need to be at the table. The Blue Mountains needs to be front and centre advocating for the best deal from Badgerys Creek Airport. The current proposal isn't the best deal. We got the short end of the stick. If we do nothing but oppose the airport, we will get nowhere. Supporters and opponents need to put their differences aside, sit at the government's table and oppose these flight paths. I attended the information session at Blaxland and I was looking forward to going and being able to grill the public servants responsible as to inflicting the lower Blue Mountains with these flight paths. However, I was greeted by nothing more than posters and flyers. Mr Mayor, I'll be submitting my own personal submission to the submission against the EIS, as well as alongside this council's. I'll be writing and lobbying from the Prime Minister down. I'll be standing with the community of the Blue Mountains, fighting the proposal that the bureaucrats of the department have inflicted upon us.